Hi, this is János and Kintaro with Real Cat Audio, Real World Audio, and today I'm answering a very long overdue question. And this question is about transient response of tube amplifiers versus solid state amplifiers. And so the answer, I just did a quick YouTube search, quick internet search for what people think about this issue, and I found a post of Roger Modjeski, and just FYI for those who don't know him, he is a very famous chief engineer, uh, engineer of amplifiers. He built both solid state and vacuum tube designs, and he is a very good person to answer this question for us. Sadly, he has passed away, and this post was, it says, 4 years ago. That's approximately around the time he died. So this might be one of Roger Modjeski's last posts. So let's read it, his words of wisdom on the subject of the transient response between solid state and tubes. So this is what he says. Most solid state amps will have faster transient response and higher slew rate than typical tube amps. Now, so what he's saying is that to answer the question is like when we are looking at a typical transistor amplifier and a typical tube amplifier. So it's not talking, that's a very different answer that you get for that question than asking the question as a good tube amplifier versus a good solid state amplifier. And he says, this is due to the high frequency limitations of the output transformer and having stable feedback. So basically, feedback is something that has a really negative impact on transient response. It's causing really high issues, especially if you, due to, according to his experience, when you also have an output transformer in the feedback loop, that's not going to have a good effect on transient response, because most output transformers are very severely compromised in the high frequency output, and that is going to cause a lot of smearing and degradation for the transient response. And that's why, as someone who is dabbling with tube amplifiers, my first thing to improve an average vacuum tube amp that you purchased in the store is to modify it in a fashion to decrease the feedback, or try to get the feedback loop out of it as much as possible. And now a lot of you will just say, oh my god, he is a heretic, and you cannot do that without any limitations, because if you have loudspeakers that demand a really high current output or have large impedance dips, and they are not designed for tube amplifiers, so you are using your tube amps basically as a solid state placeholder, then it will not work for you if you take out the feedback loop and modify the gain structure of the amplifier to suit the no feedback situation, then it will fail you miserably. So the way to improve the transient response of an amplifier, of a tube amplifier, is not just reorganizing the gain structure, getting rid of the feedback loop, but number one, making sure that you have loudspeakers that are compatible with tube technology. And most loudspeakers on the market are not compatible with vacuum tubes. And that's the crux of the issue with vacuum tube transient response, is that basically almost all commercial vacuum tube amplifier manufacturer is severely handicapping handicapping their amplifiers to make them behave as a transistorized amplifier to work with loudspeakers that are especially designed for transistorized equipment. So that's the gist of it. So that's why vacuum tube amps transient response sucks, because they are designed to suck, because they need to work with shoes that are not for their feet. And that doesn't mean that tube amps suck because they cannot drive those magnificent speakers that are designed for solid state amps. How come, like, these are the state of the art loudspeakers. We don't need some ancient junk shit to drive them. You need modern beef from transistor. So that's one point of looking at it. The other point of looking at it is that put the right size shoe on your feet. Those speakers that are optimized for solid state designs, use it with solid state. And those speakers that are optimized for vacuum tubes, use it with vacuum tubes. Don't put your strudel in your goulash. So that's my message on that. And when you don't put your strudel in your goulash, that's when you can get very good, excellent transient response from the vacuum tubes. And going one step further, we cannot just mush the whole range of vacuum tubes under one category of good transient response and bad. Each single vacuum tube type has a different tendency for how good their transient response is, and it's not just the vacuum tube, it's the amplifier topology and the power supply that defines the transient response. So basically the tubes are at the mercy of the power supply, and if the power supply cannot feed the tubes fast enough, they are not able to reproduce the transients correctly. And when you have a power supply that is super fast, that's when you will experience lightning fast transient response. So I just relate an experience of that, comparing a really good solid state amplifier that is running in class A topology, and it has really well-designed power supplies. It has 6 discrete power supplies. That's the Michael Yee PA1 amplifier, and it's a very nice sounding amplifier, which is actually optimized for loudspeakers that work with vacuum tubes. So if you are using them with current hungry monsters, then you will find that their transient response is not as good as another solid state amplifier that has massive feedback. It's not class A, and it's just designed to dump shitload of power into the speakers. In that situation, the monster solid state amp will have better transient response than the PA1, but hook them up to a loudspeaker that has high impedance, and the PA1 will destroy the low ohm champion in transient response. And then that's because the PA1 is designed for high impedance loudspeakers despite being a solid state amplifier. And it's really excellent at that. Yet when I compare the two against my single-ended triode amp that is using KT66 in triode mode and 1.2 watts output per channel, and the power supply is capable to feed like a 500 watt power demand. So basically, even at a 1 watt peak, the power supply doesn't feel any stress on its load. It's like a piece of cake, a walk in the park, not even a ripple on the ocean. And the transient response of that amplifier is just incredible. And have I measured it? No. How can I relate about it? listening to music. I was listening to sitar music, the Ustad Imrat Khan CD from Water Lily Records, Water Lily Acoustics, and when I listened to them back by back, and the advantage being given to the Micro E, because I have been using it for over a week non-stop, so it was nice and warm and cozy. And then I plugged in the single-handed, and it was really cold, so it's kind of like very biased against it. And still the dynamics, the transients, it was just like almost frightening. And I didn't get frightened because I have my buddy, and he owns a sitar, he owns a sharod. I play with him Indian music. I play tampura with him, so I kind of have an idea how a Bludin sitar should sound real life when you listen to it. And on top of attending like dozens and dozens of classical Indian concerts. So I'm really intimately familiar how that instrument sounds, and I can tell you guys that the sitar is the most brutal test of transient response for an amplifier. It's just crazy how much of a transient demand that instrument has. It's just insane. And yeah, so there the difference between the two was enormous. So basically the answer to define how good the transient response of an amplifier is, you need to know several things, and I'm showing to one of them. Have you paired it with the right speaker? Because if you have not, then you cannot tell any good approximations on its transient response, because if you are not putting the right size shoe on your feet, of course you will not be able to walk to the store and back, because you'll have problems before you reach your destination. So you need the right speaker to match with your amplifier, and then you can really draw conclusions about it. And the second one is that the amplifier topology and amplifier power supply is really king on telling you how the transient response is going to be. And it's true for both transistor and vacuum tube designs. So basically, if you lose the feedback loop or keep it absolutely minimal, then the transient response will be much better even for a solid state design. And for the vacuum tubes, same thing. And also, the more deeper you run an amplifier in class A, the better your transient response will be, because the amplifier is getting power at all times. If you run it in class B, then whenever there's a big peak, then the power supply will not be able to supply more energy, and the response, the next transient that's coming up, will poop out. So this is why class A is such a big thing, because it allows you that extremely fast transient response and that fast slew rates. That's another way of saying it for transistor circles. And so I think that's it. So basically the transient response is depending on these factors, and it's not strictly tubes against transistors, but tubes against transistors, in my experience, it has been that tubes are doing much better in this regard. Yes, I'm getting the thumbs up for that from the maestro. And however, I have never played around with transistors, so I don't know personally what the outer limits for their transient response is. Certainly, I think probably better than what the PA1 can do, but how much better? Can it get anywhere to the ballpark that I experienced with my amps? I don't know. But I can also tell you guys that when you buy commercial amplifiers, vacuum tube amps, even if they're optimized for like tube friendly loudspeakers, they are not nearly in the same ballpark as these amps that I have with me. So, but that's why I made my channel, because if you want really good results, you have to go for it yourself, because the commercial solutions try to give you something, a compromised solution that works with what's out there. So most manufacturers are optimizing their tube amplifiers to work with the average loudspeaker on the market today, which is just an absolutely horrid nightmare to pair with a tube amplifier. So that's it. I think someone is really sleepy. It's time to, go sleepy nighty, snoozy snooze. Uh, Thank you for watching, and share your comments, experiences. Look at that. Bye bye.